In the spring of 1944, General Eisenhower was convinced that Operation Overlord would bring a quick end to World War II. This operation would take place on June 6, 1944, and better become known as D-Day. This operation brought together the land, air, and sea forces of the Allied armies in what became known as the largest amphibious invasion in military history. The operation delivered 5 naval assault divisions to the beaches of Normandy, France. The invasion force included 7,000 ships and landing craft manned by over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 Allied countries. Almost 133,000 troops landed on D-Day. Casualties from the landing alone totaled to 10,300. On the morning of the attack at the southernmost drop zone, labeled as Drop Zone D and would later become known as the Cursed Zone, the 101st Airborne found themselves in a flooded field. Several men had drowned in the drop and many were wounded. Soldiers began searching for a rallying point in the village nearby. One noticeable structure was the Church of Angeville-aux-Plaines. With its stone structure and wooden benches, this building was quickly set up as an aid station to treat the wounded. Over the next 36 hours, over 80 soldiers would be treated within. Two assistant medics led the operation at the church. Both men were part of the 501st Infantry Regiment dropping at Drop Zone D. Kenneth Moore was 19 years old with 3 weeks of training as a medic, and Robert Wright, 20 years old with 3 months of training. They quickly began collecting wounded soldiers using a 2-wheeled farm cart they found nearby. As the lesser trained medic, Kenneth did most of the solo runs. Upon arrival, Robert Wright took out a flag marked with the International Red Cross and hung it on the door of the church. This would symbolize the church to be a neutral site, treating all soldiers from both sides of the war. The two found the pews as an ideal place to treat the wounded. Initially, they began to treat soldiers where they sat. As more came in, they wished they would have placed the more critically wounded towards the center aisle and those with less serious injuries towards the back. However, what began to take place was those wounded with lesser injuries began to aid those in more critical condition. At one point, the Germans opened artillery fire upon the village and a couple mortars struck the church. One mortar hit the roof and knocked a piece of plaster off the ceiling, striking Kenneth Moore on the head as he was treating a wounded soldier below. He bandaged himself up and went back to work. However, moments later, just a couple steps away, a mortar actually came through the roof, cracking the ground beneath. Miraculously for everyone inside, it turned out to be a dud, and Robert Wright quickly threw the artillery shell out the window.
Let me start by asking you a question. If you took your child to the doctor and you were sitting in the office and the doctor noticed something about your child that would limit their life expectancy by 10, maybe even 15 years, and would make it very difficult for them to socially and emotionally mature and maybe cause all kinds of medical problems. If they noticed something about your child in that room, but didn't tell you about it, would you be very happy with them? No, of course not, right? Of course not. Now, but let me ask you this question. What if the conversation that the doctor needed to have, what if the thing that they noticed wasn't something that was particularly easy to bring up? Would you still want them to tell you about it? Of course you would, right? The answer doesn't change. Just because it's a difficult conversation doesn't mean I don't want to know something about my child that could limit their life expectancy, inhibit their social and emotional development, and cause all kinds of problems. But do you know that 24% of medical doctors are reluctant to talk to parents about their child obesity? 24%. That means almost a quarter. Right? 1 in 4 doctors are reluctant to bring up something that will shorten your child's life by up to 10 years, maybe even 15, and cause a litany of medical issues. I mean, from type 2 diabetes to fatty liver disease to all kinds of different stuff that could happen to your child. And all of that because they don't want to talk to parents about their child's obesity. And 1 in 5 kids struggles with childhood obesity. It's a huge issue, right? So we've got this big problem that difficult conversations keep people from talking about very important subjects. But I think we all agree that the significance of the condition should trump the awkwardness of the conversation, right? I mean, there should be at least some tension that goes, hey, you know what? It's a significant condition. It's a significant problem. And we all agree that if we were sitting in the doctor's office, that we wish that the doctor would just go, look, you know what? The severity, the significance of this condition is more important than the awkward moment or even the reaction, because they know what's going to happen, right? They're nervous that when they say that, hey, your child is obese, there is an issue that they're worried about your reaction to that. And they probably should be, right? It's a legitimate worry, because we're probably not going to respond real nicely, are we? We're going to say, what are you saying about me as a parent? What are you saying about my kid? We'll be defensive, we'll be argumentative. But eventually we'll come around to this part of the story where we go, hey, I know that I expect more out of doctors, right? And can we just say this? Our doctors are not our friends. They are professionals that we pay to tell us the truth, no matter how difficult or hard it is to hear. And I don't know about you, but I expect even more out of my friends. I expect my friends to be even more specific and more real and more honest with me about things that are at risk in my life. Don't you? I remember about 10 years ago when I turned 40, that I didn't have any life insurance. And I was in a conversation with one of my friends, and I just mentioned that I don't have any life insurance. And my friend sat me down and said, listen, I need to talk to you about something very important. I think that you are mistreating your wife and your children by not having any life insurance. You're putting them at unbelievable risk. If something happens to you, you're leaving them high and dry and without anything. What are they going to depend on? And he was right. I went out that week and signed up and went through the health exams and did all the things so that I could get life insurance. I have life insurance today because my friend sat me down and had a hard conversation about my personal finances with me. About 25 years ago, Sheila and I decided we were going to pay off some credit cards. And I kind of got a side hustle, started selling some stuff and doing some work on the side, and I was going to use all of that money to pay off credit cards. And I told somebody that we were just giving 100% of it right as soon as it came in. It was going right to pay credit cards, and we were paying it down. And this man in my life who I had a high value for, I still have a high value and a lot of respect for, he said, hey, can I come over and talk to you for a minute? And I said, sure. And he came over and he said, hey, I know you told me about paying this credit card debt off, and I'm really glad that you're doing that. I think that's a right, good decision. But can I just encourage you? He told me. He said, I don't want you to choose to put debt above God. He said, I know that you're committed to tithing, but I think you really need to be tithing on that money. Didn't benefit him at all to say that to me. In fact, it was a huge risk. Because talking to somebody about their personal finances, that's risky, isn't it? That's really, really risky. But he took the risk and invested that in me. And I chose to, because I had such high value and respect for somebody who would take that much risk, I chose to say, hey, listen, you're right. We should do that. And we started tithing on that side hustle money instead. And man, God opened up the floodgates. And within a few months, we had paid off all of the debt when I had planned on it taking a few years. But the significance of the conversation, the significance of the condition trumped the awkwardness of the conversation. It was more important that I learned to follow God than it was that I paid off debt. And that was important to me. You know, that's really the truth, isn't it? That significant conversation or significant circumstances are almost always surrounded by awkward conversations. Haven't you noticed that? Like, it's really easy to talk about the weather, isn't it? It's really easy to talk about the economy. It's easy to talk about gas prices, right? It's easy to talk about sports, who you like, who you don't like. You know why it's easy to talk about those things? Because they don't really matter. Like, at the end of the day, there's nothing that you and your friend can do about the economy, right? I mean, we may have an opinion or another, but the reality is none of us are economists, right? And we really can't have any change. We're not in control, so we can talk about it. Like, we can talk about the weather. Doesn't really matter because you can't control it. You can talk about sports because none of us are playing them professionally, right? None of us are in a decision-making place. So the significance of that conversation is insignificant. And because of it, the awkwardness is very small. But the more significant the value, we start talking about how we treat our spouses, when we start talking about our moral choices, when we start talking about things of real significance, the awkwardness goes up. It's harder and harder to bring up how you treat your wife or your husband. It's harder and harder to bring up, hey, I don't think you're talking to that person at your work in a way that's healthy. I don't think that your relationship with that person is going to take you in a good place. I don't think what you watch on TV is going to serve your faith. Or thinking that we have even faith conversations with people are very difficult because we don't want to do two things, right? We don't want to be offensive to them. We don't want to tell them like, hey, you've got this thing. And we're nervous about having awkward conversations with people. Why? Because we don't want to appear hypocritical. We don't want to seem like we're telling them how to live their life and think ours is all together. But that's really the tension, isn't it? They're legitimate fears. I'm afraid that if I bring this up, it might offend you and you walk away from me. But I'm also afraid that you might look at me and go, well, who are you to tell me how to live? Look at you in that area. Like, it's hard for us to bring it, but that shouldn't limit it. If we really honestly care about people, we should be willing to let the significance of the conversation, the significance of the circumstance be more important to us than the awkwardness of the conversation. Let me just ask you this. Are you a follower of Jesus? I don't know about you. If you are a follower of Jesus like I am, right? There was a point in my story where somebody took the risk of sitting down and telling me that I was a sinner. They took the risk and invested in me the awkwardness of confronting me with the reality that my life was broken in sin. And I want you to know something. I'm eternally glad that they took that risk. And I don't mean that eternally glad, just forever glad. I mean my eternity is secure because they took that risk. And that's really what's at stake, isn't it? We're talking about matters of faith. The awkward conversation is an eternity conversation. Eternity is at stake in the conversations that we have with people around us. And it's difficult, right? Because people aren't really sure what to do with faith stuff. But I want you to know something. When it comes to your conversations with your friends, your loved ones, the people around you, maybe even some folks that are in this room who are holding faith in God and church and Jesus at arm's length, that conversation is eternally significant. It matters, not just to the way they live, not just to how they feel about it, not just to what they do on Sunday morning, but it matters to where our friends and our family will spend eternity. Please, 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 don't let the significance of the condition be less important to you than the awkwardness of the conversation. It's going to be awkward because it doesn't make a ton of sense, right? I mean, even Paul recognizes it. In 1 Corinthians, he says it this way. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. Like really, there's a contrast, isn't it? That the message, the idea of the cross is hard for people to get. When people who are kind of holding faith in God and church and Jesus and all that stuff at arm's length and they're not sure about it, the problem is that when they hear it, they're like, what? Why does it matter if I'm a sinner? Everybody's a sinner, right? There's all this tension they hold at arm's length. And I would suggest to us that it's an awkward conversation, isn't it? The idea of faith, the message of the cross, the idea that you and I are sinners and that God loved us so much that he sent his only son and that he stretched out his arms and died on a cross for my sin, and that if I would just believe in Jesus and place my faith and trust in him, that he would be faithful and forgive my sin, that whole idea is huge to me. It's the power of God, right, at work in my life. But to people who are outside looking in, it doesn't make any sense. It's foolishness, right? And it's our responsibility to recognize the significance of the situation in their life and say, listen, it's worth whatever it takes. It's like those medics that they saw the severity of the injuries of those people. And they said, look, we're going to do whatever it takes. We're going to embrace all the awkward. We're going to usher them into this place. We're going to lay them out, and we're going to touch their broken limbs, their open wounds. We're going to get into this mess and do whatever it takes to save them, because the severity of the condition was more important than the awkwardness of the interaction. But we have to face it, don't we? That the whole idea of faith in God and church and Jesus, the message of the cross, really, that whole sinner salvation, belief, forgiveness thing, it's really difficult, because the cross deals with a word that we don't like to use. The cross deals with our sin, doesn't it? I mean, we don't use that word a lot. We don't love to talk about sin, because when we hear the word sin, we think judgment, don't we? We think sinner. We think people pointing their finger and yelling and screaming, right? And when we think about sin, we don't like to think about it because it makes us feel less than. Maybe you've heard the word sin. Maybe it was an angry preacher pointing his finger with a mean look on his face, or maybe you saw a guy on a street corner at some point with this sentence: the wages of sin is death. That came out of Romans 6:23, by the way. It's not just the cost of sin, the wages or the cost of sin is death. That's not just a thing, that's a reality. This is a true statement, by the way. This is an absolute true statement. It's not like God didn't warn us. He told us clearly that this was the case. In the very beginning, God created the heavens, the earth, right? Adam and Eve in the garden, and he said, look, you can have free run of the whole place. You can do everything. You can just rule over it. It's yours to enjoy. But the most loving thing he did wasn't give Adam and Eve and us everything to rule over and enjoy. The most loving thing he did for us was tell us that there was a tree in the middle of the garden that we shouldn't eat of. Because he said, look, here's the tree. There's two trees, right? The tree of knowledge, the tree of life. You can eat of it, enjoy it, do the things. It's all the good stuff, right? But there's this other tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Just don't even eat it. Don't touch it. Let's just stay away from it. Because here's the important piece of it. God loved us enough to give us the dignity of being able to choose. Because he said to him, look, the tree of life, you can have it, run with it, enjoy it. Everything's going to be fine. That's the whole garden. Everything's yours. This one tree, if you touch it, if you eat it, you will die. He warned us of it. And it's the most kind and loving thing he did. Because, listen, just think about it this way. If God said, look, you can have the whole place, you just run and do whatever you want, but the only thing is you can never leave. You can go, you can have everything, but you can never choose not to do what I say. Can I just point out to you, that's not love. That is kidnapping. That's God saying, hey, you've got to stay in the captivity of enjoy. You have to do everything I want you to do. God loved you and I enough to say, I love you, I'll give you everything, but I'll also give you the option to leave. I'll give you the option to choose to walk away. If you do, you're going to die. It's your choice. But I want you to know something. You can have life with me or life without me. It's up to you. That's awesome that God gave me that choice. The penalty, the cost of that. It's not God pointing out and going, this is the judgment I give. It's God saying that the cost of that is death. You see, we say this a lot around Journey. We want to make sure that people always feel loved. I want to make sure that every single person who comes in these doors hears the truth and is loved. And I'm going to put a sentence up on the screen that I've said a lot since we started this church in 2010, because I want to make sure that we see it. And I want to put it up here because I want you to pay close attention to it. It says this: if you leave Journey, it won't be because we didn't love you. If you leave Journey, it won't be because we didn't do our very best to love you. But if you stay, it won't be because we didn't tell you the truth. You know, we say a lot of times around here that we want you to know that with great confidence that you can belong here even if you don't believe the way we believe. I just had a conversation with a guy this week, and I was talking to him, and he's Jewish, and he's from here in Jackson, and I was having a conversation with him, and I invited him to come and be a part of Journey. Just say, you should come and hang out with us some weekend. And you know what he said to me? He goes, well, I'm Jewish. I don't really believe like you believe. And I said, hey, listen, we work really hard at Journey to make sure that you can belong and be a part of it, even if you don't believe the way we believe. But what we won't do is hide the truth. If you leave Journey, it won't be because we didn't do everything we could to love you, no matter what you believe or where you're at or what your life looks like. But if you stay, it won't be because we just hid the truth from you. We're going to talk about sin because sin is important, and the severity of the condition trumps the awkwardness of the conversation. And we want to be real and honest. It would be like me knowing that you have cancer and not telling you. Me knowing you have cancer and not telling you about it wouldn't be kind. That would be evil, right? You need to know the severity of the condition should trump the awkwardness of the conversation. I mean, back to that phrase, the wages of sin is death. One of the reasons that's always offensive to people is because we talk about it like there's a period right there. Can I tell you something? This is not a whole sentence. I mean, it is. The wages of sin is death. That is grammatically a sentence, but that's not the whole sentence. There's more to this sentence. Now listen, I didn't pass a lot of English. I'm not an English major by any means, right? I mean, I wrote a book. It had 180 pages in it. I sent it off to the editor. I got it back in 180 pages. There were 10,400 edits because I had made all kinds of grammatical errors. But one thing I didn't mess up is my favorite part of the English language. My favorite part of the English language isn't a word, it's not a phrase, it's a punctuation. And the punctuation that's so important comes right here. The wages of sin is death. If there were a period at the end of that, we'd all be over. There'd be nothing to talk about. The wages of sin is death. God loves us so much that he said, hey, look, you can have full reign of the whole thing. Just stay away from this thing because if you eat this, you're going to die. You can do it my way, with me or without me. If you do it without me, it will cause your death. And if he said, hey, look, I told you so. The wages of sin is death. It's a period. That would be the end of the story. But because there's that comma, but because that little tiny thing, because that doesn't just end with a dot, there's more to the story, right? The wages of sin or the cost of sin is death. But the gift of God is life. That God loved us so much that he gave himself, right? He stepped into the story. The wages of sin is death. We will talk about sin, but sin is not the end of the story. Life is the story. This is what's crazy that Romans 5 puts it this way, that God demonstrates his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God didn't talk about his love for us. He didn't feel his love for us. He didn't emote his love for us. He demonstrated, he showed his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. The cross is offensive to us because it talks about sin, but the cross is offensive to us, but it's the power of God in our lives for those of us who are being saved because it gives us life. Jesus' death gives us life. You know, that's not the only reason that the cross is ludicrous or foolishness to people who are far from it, holding faith at arm's length. The cross is foolishness because it seems like it's exclusive, doesn't it? I mean, when Jesus says, that I am, let's say he says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Those are definitive articles, by the way. I know I'm sounding more and more like an English major, but when he says I am the way, he doesn't say I am a way. He doesn't say I am a truth, I am a life. He doesn't say I'm one of the truth, the way, the truth, or the life. He says I am the way, the definitive article. There is no other way. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And in case that was confusing, he says no one comes to the Father. No one gets to God except through me. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds exclusive, doesn't it? It's one of the reasons why the cross is offensive to people. It sounds like we're excluding someone. But can I point out to you that the cross isn't exclusive? It's inclusive. You know, if God said, I am a way, and there's lots of ways. There's not. Can I just be clear? There's one way to God, and that is through the person of Jesus Christ. And that is not an exclusive statement. What if I said it to you this way? What if I said to you, I believe that if I watch enough Barney videos when I was a kid, that God and I are okay? If I told you that was it, most of you would say, even if you're here today and you're like, I think there are many ways to God, you would probably say, well, that's not one of them, right? I mean, watching Barney videos and your kids, that's stupid. That's not a way to God. That's just stupid, right? How would you think that what you do in watching a stupid video of a purple dinosaur would get you okay with God? Every one of us would agree that's dumb, right? But can we agree this? It would be cruel of God to tell us there are some ways to him and some ways that don't work. That, like, you can find God a lot of ways, and there are some. It would be cruel of God to give us many ways to God and not tell us which ones are good and which ones are bad. This is what I love about this statement. It's the most inclusive statement ever made to mankind, to say, listen, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Everybody, nobody comes to Father but by me, which means everybody comes the same way. It doesn't matter if you have money or don't have money. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. It doesn't matter if you are a good person or you really struggled to make some good moral choices. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He's saying that no matter what your color of your skin is, or what your background looks like, or what your foreground looks like, or how many regrets or stories you've got, it doesn't matter how much of your story that you wish you could draw a box around and delete and forget it ever happened, or if you've just figured a way to live a really good life, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to him another way. We all get to Jesus the same way. Most people think that if my good outweighs my bad, man, that I'm good with God. That is so not the truth. Your good and your bad don't matter. It's only the good of Jesus. And the kindest and loving and most inclusive thing that Jesus could do is say, listen, everybody comes to me the exact same way. It doesn't matter about your goodness. It doesn't matter about your money. It doesn't matter about your influence. It doesn't matter about the color of your skin or your background or what country you grew up or what language you speak. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father another way except for the way that God lets everybody in. The door is not exclusive, it's inclusive. But at the end of the day, the real reason that the cross is offensive to us is the cross is offensive to us because it really is a problem, isn't it? And most of the time what we do is we make the cross offensive, don't we? I mean, we hold up the sign that says the wages of sin is death, and we don't finish the sentence. That's not kind to people. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God's eternal life, right? Or we tell people, listen, I am the way, the truth, and life. We don't point out that this is such an open statement and such an inclusive and welcoming way. That I want to point this out to you. If you've been using the Bible as a weapon on people, the message of the cross is offensive to people. It does not need your help, right? The idea of Jesus and God and faith and church pointing out our sin, pointing out that there's one way to Jesus, that is offensive enough. It does not need you to help it, right? It does not need you to use the Bible to beat people up. It does not need you to try and convince people or fix or change people. That the message of the cross is offensive on its own because it points out our biggest struggle, isn't it? I'm a fan of Ted Lasso, by the way. I know that sounds unrelated. But in the show, Dr. Sharon Fieldstone tells Ted a quote that I later learned was adapted from James Garfield. And it says this, that the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. The reality is that the idea, the truth that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life will set you free. But first it's going to make you uncomfortable. The truth that the cost of your sin and my sin is death, it will set you free. But first it's going to make you miserable. And I think at the end of the day, the real reason that the cross is offensive and it doesn't need our help to be offensive is because it touches on the most difficult thing we have to deal with. The cross points out our insufficiency. I mean, we don't like that word, do we? I don't know about you, but I don't, right? I like to think I got my stuff together. I like to think I can make it happen. Especially as a guy, I like to think that I can handle the circumstances. But the cross is one of those things in my life that points out that I am insufficient, that I don't have what it takes. In Romans chapter 7, Paul is talking about his own struggle with his sin in his life. And he goes on throughout. He's like, you see this like in 21 verses, and I'm not going to read them all to you. But he goes back and forth, and he goes in the struggle that every one of us goes through. I want to do what's right, but there's something going on inside of me that wants to do what's wrong. No matter how hard I try to do the right thing, there's always this thing tugging at me to make me do what's wrong. I've got this tension that kind of comes up. And Paul talks about it like it's a real life struggle that you and I live. I want this, but I wind up with this. I want to do what's right, but I wind up doing what's wrong. No matter how much I want to do the good thing, there's this evil inside of me that tugs me down. And the cross points out this problem. At the end of it, Paul says this, who will save me from this wretched body of death? Only Jesus Christ. See, the problem, the reason we really don't like faith and God and church and Jesus isn't because it doesn't make us feel good. It's because it really shines a light on the fact that you and I don't have what it takes. That every single one of us haven't fallen short of somebody else's goodness. That we've fallen short of God's glory. It's hard for us to hear. We don't like words like Romans 3:23 that say, for all, you and me, I'm the king, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. See, most of us want to compare our goodness to our badness, right? Our good deeds to our bad. Well, that doesn't work, right? Some of us want to compare our good or our bad to somebody else's. Well, I'm not as bad as he is, or I'm not as bad as she is. It doesn't matter. Because our goodness isn't compared to our badness. Our goodness isn't compared to our neighbor. Our bad deeds and behaviors, our bad sin it's not compared to that. It's compared to God. The glory of God is perfection. And the real reason that the cross is offensive is it brings out that you and I are in desperate need of a Savior. It's the same thing Paul cried out at the very end. Who will save me from this wretched body of death? Only Jesus. Can I just mention this? There are two kinds of people in this room. Some of you are followers of Jesus, and you, as soon as I started talking about the awkward conversations that needed to happen or the things that you needed to struggle through, you knew that, like, hey, there's this person in my life. There's this person at work, this person in my family, my cousin, my brother, my friend, who need the awkwardness of the conversation needs to be less important to us than the severity of their lost condition. And you know that need. Can I just tell you, the most valuable thing you can do is invest in their life. Invest in their life. Start to care about the things that they care about. Learn what they care about. Care about them. Don't care about them as a project. Don't try to check them off of a list. Love their life. Invest in them. And can I just tell you this? You have one of the best tools I think we can put together. That Journey Church exists to help people take their next step toward Jesus. Invest in their life, and then invite them to join you. Investing in their life and inviting them to have the awkward conversation, sure. Yeah, it's going to be weird, right? Yeah, it's going to be odd when you say, hey, would you try to come and hang out with us at church? Why don't you come and be a part of this? Why don't you do this? It will be awkward when you bring up the reality that they, just like you, are a sinner, and that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that the full and abundant and rich and satisfying life that they're looking for isn't going to be found elsewhere. And that there's going to be a moment when you have to talk to them about the reality that this full life that God wants for them is only found in Jesus. But it won't happen unless you invest and invite. But can I just mention this to you? If you're here today, and maybe this whole time I've been talking to somebody else, about how we make the Bible a weapon, or how we talk about the wages of sin is death, and we talk about the gift of God that's eternal life, and Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and we talk about this inefficiency or insufficiency that we have, that where Paul cries out like, hey, who's going to save me from this wretched body of death? Maybe this whole time you've been listening to me talk to them, and you've been going, oh man, I needed to hear that. That's an awkward conversation that is important to me, because you've maybe in this recognized, just as we've been sitting here, you've started to recognize that you have never really begun a relationship with Jesus. And that you've never really recognized and understood that until right this minute, that the cost of your sin is death, that sin has separated you from God, and that the only way to God is Jesus. Maybe as you've been sitting here, the Holy Spirit has been working in your life, pushing buttons and making you uncomfortable and kind of going, oh, I didn't really want to feel like that. The awkward conversation, God doesn't shy away from that awkward conversation. And my guess is that God has been having that conversation in your heart today. Can I just invite you into this? That a beginning of a relationship with Jesus isn't marked by just some external thing. It's something that is happening right now in your life. And I think that it begins by confessing to God. It begins by just saying, God, I accept that I'm a sinner and that I sinned against you. And just telling God, it's just as simple as saying to him, just in words, we call it prayer, right? To say, I accept that I'm a sinner and that you are the only way to have a relationship, that your sacrifice on my behalf. And I accept and I confess that you are Lord. It's that simple. But can we just say this? It begins there, but man, does it not end there. That is an important step. Maybe one of the most fun steps you'll ever take in your faith, for sure. The beginning one, right? But it's not the only one. Would you do me this favor? If that's something that you want to do or want to talk more about, or that's an experience you want to have that you had this morning or you want to have, would you do me this favor? Go to ourjourney.news and click on the Next Step tab on that little button on the bottom right corner. And you're going to see, I want to begin a relationship with Jesus on that list. As soon as you click that, and I want to begin a relationship with Jesus, it's going to ask you a couple of really simple questions about you, just so that we can contact you. And I'll promise you this, if you'll do that, I would love to have a conversation with you. And I would love to outline and help you figure out how to begin a real and growing relationship with Jesus. Because it's the full and rich and satisfying life. And I'll promise you this, it's going to be awkward for you, right? Talking about sin is. Talking about Jesus is. It's awkward. But the significance of your condition, of our condition, our sin, is more important to me than the awkwardness of the conversation. So please, ourjourney.news, click on Next Step, go up and just select that I want to begin or talk about beginning a relationship with Jesus. Do that today, would you?